Thank you very much for putting my paper on the program. And yeah, it's about financial advice and retirement savings. So the title is very easy, straightforward, and this is what this paper is about. It's joint work with Daniel Höchle from the University of Applied Sciences in Northern Switzerland, Nick Schaub from Koblenz, and Markus Schmid from St. Gallen. So although my name sounds most Swiss, I'm the only non-Swiss co-author on this project. So it is a paper about the Swiss retirement system. So I hope I learned some of the details about that system from my co-authors so that I can convey this. So the motivation for this paper, I think for this audience is pretty obvious. So we see demographic change in a lot of developed and emerging economies that puts a lot of pressure on pension systems. And many countries at the same time have shifted responsibility to individuals to take care of their pension savings, and so they have to make up their own mind how to make these decisions. And if we look at some numbers, so this is just from an industry survey here from Schroeder, so about 1/3 of retirement income currently comes from your own personal retirement savings, while the part that comes from the pension, state pension system is as low as 10% in the US, and similarly relatively low numbers across the board here. So people have to think about this themselves. Well, problem is, are they really in a situation to do that in a prudent and optimal way? And a lot of the literature argues, well, maybe not completely. So there are papers showing that, like we have very prominent authors from that field in the audience, that individuals suffer from maybe limited financial literacy, a lot of different behavioral biases that lead them to potentially undersave for retirement. And if at least at post we ask them, exposed we ask them, do you think you're well prepared for retirement, or do you wish you had saved more for retirement? Most people would say, well, I wish I had saved more previously for retirement. So this is based on people that are currently in retirement. So policymakers, regulators are aware of this, that there seems to be a problem. So they have introduced different measures on different levels to encourage people to take care of their old age provisions, to encourage them to save more for retirement. So this includes, like in the US, 401k plans, so employer-sponsored plans. This includes tax-exempt rules for retirement savings introduced by the government. However, if you look at how people react to these incentives, we see that they do react to these incentives, but probably not in an optimal way. So they don't fully take advantage of these incentives that are in place. For example, in Switzerland, setting of our study, there's a system of tax advantage retirement accounts, and I'll explain a little bit more detail later on, but we find that only 60% of employees take advantage of this. And we would argue later on that it is optimal for pretty much everybody to take advantage of this. If you don't, it's really money left on the table. And then there are these older studies looking at 401k plans that also show that a quite significant fraction of people don't take advantage of these sometimes pretty high-powered financial incentives to save for retirement at all, or not at an optimal level. Then on a more general level, we see that this effect that despite this relatively high equity market risk premium, we see a lot of people not participating in equity markets at all, the stock market non-participation puzzle as it's called. And again, in Switzerland, our setting only 30%, even lower than in some other countries, participate either directly or indirectly in equity markets at all. And then if we look at the cross-section, we also see that certain groups of the population are at a higher risk of insufficient savings for retirement, and there are some gender effects. Poor individuals, maybe not very surprisingly, have a harder time saving in an optimal way for retirement, and also less financially literate individuals. Okay. So in this context, we try to understand, and so what can we do about this? And I think we have heard a couple of papers today, and I think there are more to come, on financial literacy. Of course, you can argue if people are more financially literate, they will be in a better position to take advantage of these effects. And Philippe, you have this recent paper in the Review of Economics and Statistics on like financial education helping to better understand tax effects that would fit into under this section. Our paper is about the second route, more related to the first paper this morning on financial advice and the role financial advice can play to better prepare for retirement. So we're asking a couple of questions here, and I think, as has been mentioned again this morning, it's pretty hard to identify a causal effect here. So we think we can do a little bit of that for the first questions, and towards the end of these questions getting more and more descriptive what we can do with the data. So what are we trying to do? First, we try to understand how does retirement-related financial advice, I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit later, impact holdings in these tax-exempt retirement accounts that people should take advantage of. Then we look at a little bit more general question, how does retirement-related, and it's important, it's obviously retirement-related advice, affect equity market participation at the extensive and intensive margin. We're going to try to see whether we find any cross-sectional differences between groups of investors. And then on a more basic level, and this is where we can do less in terms of identification, do advisors help investors to actually save more for retirement, or is it just shifting across different forms of saving that advisors induce? And finally, we'll talk a little bit about conflicts of interest as far as we can these advisors are subject to. Okay, so how do we contribute? I think we contribute to two streams of the literature in household finance. The first one on retirement savings, obviously. So a lot of papers having documented this general under savings and also these cross-sectional differences in under saving for retirement. And I think ours is the first paper, at least I'm aware of, that uses actual retirement-related financial decisions of clients that we observe to analyze the impact of advice on personal pension savings and these cross-sectional differences. And of course, by looking at advice, we also contribute to the literature on financial advice in general. And there, I think my reading of the literature is that most papers have a relatively negative view on financial advice. So performance implications are relatively negative, including two of our papers. Some of the behavioral biases people seem to be subject to are even reinforced if you talk to your advisors. There are also papers that show a positive impact. So this morning we've seen the evidence that at least the advice we see is often in line with economic theory. The question is, would people really follow that advice? But that's different a little bit, I think. Chichi has a paper on tax-efficient mutual fund investments and advisors. Lina and Ma, this paper that shows advisors had to participate in the stock market in general, not in a retirement context necessarily. And some papers show reductions of behavioral biases. But again, overall, most papers have a negative view. We want to see is there a positive role in the context of taking advantage of these retirement incentives and to save more for retirement. So I think this is the only one explicitly looking at retirement-related financial advice. Okay, good. Couple of words on the, yes?
Just to verify on the motivation. So in the research question you had, I'm thinking what is specific about retirement and what is more generally about investment decision. You could rephrase all this, many of these questions as what is the role of advisor in helping people make sound financial decisions or investment decisions. So what is
So I think the retirement context is clearer because we know people don't save enough for retirement. But you see, generally, if you make investments, do you invest enough or not is a very tricky statement to make what would be optimal. So here we have a setting which is really saving for retirement with very high-powered financial incentives. So that's why we put this all in the retirement context. And we think retirement savings is, my feeling, is even more important for the general population than your normal savings decisions. Or put differently, your normal savings decisions are often made in mind with trying to prepare for retirement, right? And the setting is very retirement specific. So these texts, I explain the setting in a second, and that's set in a retirement context. Yeah.
Most of the people, at least in the US, do not invest in risky assets outside of their retirement. So all the risky, a good chunk of risky investment is just in the retirement. You're looking for per household, please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good. So a couple of words on the Swiss retirement system, just to see in which setting we're acting. So the Swiss pension system, as many systems, is based on 3 pillars. So we have a state pension system, which provides a relatively low subsistence level, like insurance in a sense. We have occupational pension provisions, which would be more like 401k plans or related stuff. And we have private pension provisions, which are regulated in a way that you can put a certain amount of your salary, it's roughly like 6,000-7,000 Swiss francs. Swiss francs, by the way, are roughly $1 US, a little bit more, per year into a tax-exempt retirement account. And there are two types of accounts: retirement savings accounts, which just earn a fixed savings rate, and there are specific retirement funds that you can invest in. And we see that retirement savings dominate in Switzerland. So 80% of the people, or 80% of the money is in these retirement savings accounts. Or you can just independently save for retirement, but then it's not tax exempt. So what we are going to look at are these retirement savings accounts. And as I said, it's tax exempt, so there's a very strong incentive to really invest these 6,000 Swiss francs per year in that account. If we do a back of the envelope calculation, the median Swiss employee loses about 2% of its annual income every year by not taking advantage of this possibility to invest in these tax-exempt retirement accounts. And retirement savings accounts, they also by regulation have to pay a little bit of a higher interest rate than normal savings accounts. So there's an additional incentive to do that. And there are no fees on these accounts. So and this is something we have to come back to later. So it's not a strong incentive on the side of the advisor or the bank who offers this possibility to push people to really do that. So I'll come back to that point a little bit later. Financial advice. How does financial advice in Switzerland work? Typically, financial advice is provided by bank employees. I would say 98% of the cases. So we don't have a lot of independent financial advisors, but usually people have a house bank that they do all of their business with. They have their checking account there, their savings account, and there's a person in that bank who's assigned to them, and they're going to talk to that person with respect to all types of financial matters. We show in our other papers that this allocation is relatively random. There's not a lot of matching going on. It's just you walk into the branch and whoever is available is going to be assigned to be your advisor. This advice is provided for free to clients. Of course, they have to be compensated somehow, so we come back to that, but there's no explicit fee you pay for that. But the bank is compensated who employs these advisors based on commissions, kickbacks, and sales provisions. So obviously there might be conflict of interest that we have to talk about later on. Good. What data do we use?
Well,
so we have data. Sorry?
You don't need to say might be, there is a conflict of interest, surely.
Yes. So what data do we use? We have brokerage account data from a large Swiss retail bank, so it's similar to the Bar-Bordin data, but a little bit more detailed. So it's a brick and mortar standard bank that offers all of these services that I just described. So you can take out your mortgage, checking account, savings accounts, and you can invest your retirement savings in an account with that bank. Our sample period is 10 years, and we have a random sample of the bank's private clients, so they exclude the very richest clients, and they only give us data on clients whose bank rate exceeds 75,000 Swiss francs at least once during our sample period. So this was just a restriction set by the bank. In some additional analysis, we also look at poorer clients, but we only have a smaller sample of those. And 75,000 Swiss francs, roughly 79,000 US dollars. This is like a normal Swiss person. It's not particularly rich and not particularly poor. About 20,000 clients, excluding retired clients, because you want to look at retirement decisions. And the data, how does the data look like? We have all trades in financial instruments on a daily level, as well as account balances is all accounts, including retirement accounts on a monthly level. Okay? Then, and that's important later for the structure of our analysis, we have all advisory contacts between clients and advisors. So we know who's the client, who's the advisor, and on what day did they meet. We know what the topic of the conversation is, at least in broad categories. So we know, is it investment related? Is it retirement related? Is it technical issues? Is it whatever, mortgage related? And we know who initiated the contact. So is this the client walking to the branch and talking to the advisor, or is this the advisor calling up the client? Okay, and that's also going to be important. And we have some information from the managerial accounting of the bank, where they assign a profit number to each client in each quarter. So we can talk a little bit about profitability of these things later on. Some descriptive statistics, nothing too unusual here, I think. Roughly gender balance, 45 years old, 16% have university degree. In Switzerland, you can have well-paid jobs without a university degree, so some people are surprised about the low fractions here. 84% are employed, typical income 90,000 Swiss francs, and at the beginning of the sample, roughly 7 years of bank relation. So how does the typical financial portfolio of these guys look like? So they have an average bank wealth of 155,000 Swiss francs. So Swiss people are on average relatively rich. And they have, of those, 23,000 in these retirement accounts. And what's interesting to see is only 45% of our clients at the beginning of our sample have a retirement account at all. And this is something we argue everybody should have that. And 15% of our clients open this account during our sample period. If you look at equity investments, similarly at the beginning of our sample, 28%, only 28% have an account, 8% of the clients open an account over those 10 years. And the contact characteristics, so each client is contacted roughly a little bit more than once per year by an advisor for whatever reason, but out of those, only 0.13 are retirement-related contacts. So on average, every 8 years across all clients, you're contacted with respect to retirement-related advice. Good, so first question, how is financial advice and investments in these tax-exempt retirement accounts related? Well, as you've heard this morning, it's very difficult to make any causal statements in here. And we are not, just a second, we are not claiming that we can prove causality, but we'll try to do a couple of steps towards making causal statements. Yeah.
Can you just clarify? So, do I have to open an account with the bank to have a retirement account in Switzerland?
Yes.
Okay, and I will be only investing in what bank can offer, or I can invest in whatever is available?
No, only what the bank offers. So in the case of a savings account, it's trivial. For the 20% that is in fund accounts, it's a menu of specific retirement funds, which I'm not going to focus on too much here because this is not what people typically do, but then it's only the products that the bank offers. So it's not, you cannot invest in whatever you want.
Different menu of investments, basically.
Yes. Okay, so identification challenges, a couple of slides on this. Well, there's a lot of heterogeneity and matching and selection going on all types of levels here. So first, obviously advised clients are not identical to unadvised clients, but they differ systematically, so we have to take care of this. And the second component that is often neglected, so a lot of studies look at clients and define them as advised or unadvised. However, if we look at the individual trades that clients do, we see that some of the trades they do are conducted right after talking to the advisor, but most trades are done by these people without talking to the advisor in a general investment context. So 80%, you find in this other paper, of even clients that you would classify as advised clients are conducted independently, not after talking to your advisor. And of course, advisory contacts are not random. So particularly if a client approaches an advisor to talk about retirement, that client probably would have done something about retirement even if there wouldn't have been the advisor to start with. So how do we address these points? First, everything we do is, or most of the stuff we do is within person. So we include client fixed effects to really tease out how does behavior differ after they talk to the advisor from what they do otherwise, which should control for all non-time varying client characteristics. And we focus always on activities after retirement-related advisor-initiated contacts. So it's not the client thinking about contacting the advisor, but the advisor contacting the client, which might also be endogenous, so I'll come back to that later, but this is what we do at that stage. First result, unconditionally, so the probability to open a retirement account after an advisory contact is 8%. In that month of the advisory contact, while the unconditional average, well, unconditional given you haven't opened an account yet, per month is 0.3%. So it jumps from 0.3 to more than 8%, and there's also some elevated probability right in the month afterwards. So that's first indication that people seem to do something after being contacted by the advisor. Well, we talked about matching and identification. Of course, this doesn't tell us anything about causality yet. It's just a graphical illustration. So what we see is, are contacts random? Well, we see no. Advisors are not contacting clients randomly. So for this analysis, we relate whether there is a retirement-related advisor-initiated contact to client characteristics. And what we see is, well, male and female clients are equally likely to be contacted with respect to retirement. However, older clients are more likely to be contacted, and richer clients and clients for which bank wealth recently jumped a lot or increased a lot are also more likely to be contacted. And better educated, we only have that information for a subsample, better educated clients are also more likely to be contacted. So with respect to these cross-sectional differences I mentioned at the beginning, we don't find that disadvantaged clients, if we say female, poor, and uneducated clients have more problems, they are certainly not more likely to be contacted by advisors, but at least with respect to gender, we don't find any differences. But important for identification, contacted clients differ systematically from non-contacted clients still, even after focusing on advisor-initiated contacts. At the same time, we see, however, that this contacting doesn't seem to be overly sophisticated because the impact of idiosyncratic shocks, like a change in bank wealth that the advisor could observe, only has a very small or no impact of the advisor contacting. So that doesn't seem to be a very complicated artificial intelligence system sending a push message to the advisor, now you should contact that client. So what are we going to do? Well, we will of course control for everything that is time-varying and observable, which is not going to be sufficient, but that's what we do in all of our regressions. Second problem, or our next problem with respect to identification, what about the time dimension? So this was about the cross-section. Well, there might be times when it's more likely that clients think about retirement savings, and advisors know that, and therefore contact clients at exactly that time because they might be more responsive. Like in January, if the newspaper discusses pension reforms or pension savings currently, if there's a marketing campaign by the bank, whatever reason you can think of why there are certain periods where this is more relevant. And this could, of course, lead to a spurious correlation. This can be addressed relatively easily, I think, by adding time-fixed effects to everything we do in addition to these time-varying investor characteristics. If we do all of this, so these are the first regression results. So we relate whether a client opens a retirement account in month T to the fact whether, to a dummy, whether there is a retirement-related, always advisor-initiated advisory contact. And unconditional, we find this 8% probability that you've seen in the picture. If we throw in control variables, we find that male investors seem to be less likely to think about retirement accounts. Older investors also are less likely, maybe they're already that old that it doesn't make that much sense anymore, but richer ones and ones that have a change in bank wealth are more likely to react. If we throw in time-fixed effects, we see they explain quite a bit, so there seem to be time patterns, so coefficient is reduced to about half. And the last column, so these are all marginal effects. In the last column, we can't show marginal effects because we have client-fixed effects, so that doesn't work in the logic setting, but we have still a very highly significant impact of advisory contacts of opening an account. So this is the extensive margin. Next problem you can, same thing at the intensive margin. So intensive margin is how much do you invest in these retirement accounts, conditional on that you have already a retirement account. So on average, people invest 1 point, or the growth in these retirement accounts due to new money invested there is on average 1.66% per month. It jumps to more than 8%, increases fivefold after retirement-related contract and also a little bit in the following month. This is the regression evidence, by and large consistent. Yes?
Just to clarify the comparison, so what happened to the contact which are initiated by the client? They are omitted from the sample, or they are part of the zero?
So they are in the picture. They are part of this unconditional average. So that's across everything essentially, including all contacts. But in this regression, they would be bunched together with the non-contact periods. But we can also leave them out. So that would. But what we didn't do, and what I think is on our agenda, is to look at how do they react if the client initiated the contact. So this is something we didn't look at specifically yet.
So did you say that the bank is not charging any fees on these pension savings accounts? So what is the incentive then for the advisor to initiate?
So what is the incentive for the advisor to do that? I come back to that point. Let me postpone that. If I don't answer, ask again, but that will be okay. So this is the intensive margin. Similar pattern. Next problem here, this is all on the monthly level, so maybe there's reverse causality. The client, the advisor observes the client is doing something, fussing around with some retirement account, so I better call him or her and tell her what to do. So maybe this is what we see here, because this is on a monthly level. So what we can do, at least for the retirement fund case, we can look at daily trades. We don't have daily investments in the retirement savings accounts, but we have daily trades in retirement funds. So for that, we can do the whole analysis on the daily level, and then we see that it's very unlikely that we have reverse causality on the same day, I guess. And we see that right on the day of the advisory contact, we see much more trading in retirement funds, and it's also net. So the red are sells, blue are buys, so we see net buying right on the day of the advisory contact, and the strongest effect is actually one day after. So I think this rules out here reverse causality in the sense of the advisor reacting to the client starting to invest in retirement savings or fund accounts. Good. 10 minutes, okay. So I can be quick on the second one, financial advice and stock market participation. We do the exactly same set of analysis, extensive margin and intensive margin, to check whether they start investing in equities or whether they invest more in equities after retirement-related advisory contacts. And this is exactly what we see. So unconditional average to start investing in equities is 0.11%. This jumps to more than 0.5%, so nearly five-fold increase again after an advisory contact. I don't think I have to spend too much time on the regression results. They show the same picture, and we find the same on the intensive margin. So on average, people invest 0.9% more per month in equities, conditional on having started investing in equities, and this doubles after an advisory-related retirement, advisor-initiated retirement-related contact. Okay, and we also find the same if we run our regressions. Okay, so more on causality. There's still, well, probably a lot of problems, but one problem that we still didn't fully address is, I think, so what we do is, we focus on advisor-initiated retirement-related contacts with time and client fixed effects. We control for time-varying factors that we can observe in this linear regression set. We have two potential problems. First one is a simple one. Maybe observable factors have a nonlinear impact. Okay. Second one, and I think this is the problematic one, unobservable time-varying client-specific variables that influence both the probability to be contacted and directly also the decision to do something about your retirement savings. The first one we address by propensity score matching based on all observables, so that should take care of nonlinear impacts. The second one we address by trying to find an instrument which hopefully addresses this to some extent at least. So propensity score matching, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Everything goes through, so there's equity as well as tax-exempt investment at the extensive and intensive margin. Maybe more interesting is the IV regression. So we need an instrument that influences the probability of a client being contacted by an advisor that is exogenous, that has no direct impact on client savings for retirement except through that advisory channel, so relevant and exclusion. And our idea is that advisors will contact clients in some type of order. So maybe they have their Rolodex that they go through, maybe clients are ordered based on when they sign up with the bank, maybe they're just sorted alphabetically in their Excel sheet, but they might follow some ordering. We don't know the ordering. We also don't know the surnames, so we can't reconstruct an alphabetic ordering. However, we argue that if a client has been contacted in the past in the same month at the same time, then I was contacted, then the probability that I am contacted again is higher if this other client, which you call a fellow client, is also contacted today or in this month. Okay, so this is the instrument we're going to use. So, and does this work? Well, in the first stage, at least, we find retirement-related contacts that I am contacted is higher if this fellow client that has been contacted in the same month in the past is contacted in this month. This suggests that advisors seem to follow some type of ordering. So F statistic is comfortably high. And
But how do you decide who the fellow client is?
Whether that person was contacted in the same month then I was contacted in the past by the same advisor.
So there's a match on the month. So you and I are contacted the same month?
Yes, so month and year. So if you were contacted like in December 2017, and I also was contacted in December 2017, now I'm contacted again, and I argue if you are contacted in this month, the probability that I will be contacted again is higher.
Okay.
That's exactly the aim. Yeah.
So what is the mean here?
Sorry?
But how large is the mean here in the first stage?
The mean?
Yeah,
So you mean what that means? How much more likely I'm?
correct.
I think that should be. I have to check, but mine would be 2%, which is, and the unconditional probability is 0.18. But I would have to check. That's the grain of salt. Okay, and if we use the instrumented retirement-related contact using this instrument, we still find this is for the extensive margin of opening a retirement account. Significant goes down, but there still seems to be some positive effect. This doesn't always go through. We find it also for the intensive margin of changes in the retirement account. Mm-hmm. And we find it at the extensive margin for the equity market participation. Mm-hmm. We don't find a significant impact on the intensive margin of equity investments for the instrumented version, but yeah, okay. So yeah, this is what we try to do with respect to identification. What about disadvantage?
Sorry, can you do some kind of placebo falsification test? I don't know.
What do you have in mind?
I don't have anything in mind, but I think that would be very convincing if you could do it.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah. Thank you. We didn't do it yet, but yeah.
There could be some investment decision you observe which are not related to.
But they would have to be made by this other client at the same time in the past.
No. You are using the same matching and some, but you look at an outcome which should not.
Oh, as a placebo, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's what we could do. Yeah.
We're going to do some portfolio returns or any other measures of benefits to investors from opening their account.
No, because I think that would be very long term. It's mainly the tax saving, but we'll do something similar for the bank. And I'll come to that in a second. What about cross-sectional differences? So we did find in this determinants regression that poorer clients and less educated clients are actually less likely to be contacted. So advisors don't, maybe not very surprisingly, I mean they work at a private firm, they don't seem to particularly help the disadvantaged ones. So this is what we have shown before. Second question is, given they are contacted, are disadvantaged groups more likely to react? Which could be due to two reasons. Either the advisor working harder or less hard to convince them, or them being more responsive per se. This is something we cannot decide, which is maybe not that much of a problem because honestly we don't find much here. So what we do is in the regression we interact this advisor-initiated contact dummy with a dummy of being part of one of these disadvantaged groups. And typically, with respect to retirement accounts, our cleanest setting where we have this tax advantage, there are no differences. So this interaction term is not significant at either the intensive or extensive margin. For equity investments, there are some effects, but one goes in the one direction, the other in the other direction, so we don't want to push a story here. So overall, there's no uniform picture. So I think we can conclude advisors don't particularly help disadvantaged clients.
In some sense, and I'm not saying that interpretation is wrong, Another interpretation might be that here's a defined class that doesn't follow my advice anyway. So why am I going to waste my time doing it? No, I'm not trying to.
Yeah.
I would rather than no uniform picture emerges. I mean, I think there's a couple of possible explanations of it.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
I'm not discounting
Very
this.
nice. Yeah. Okay. Next point, and here I say I have to be very descriptive. So, do advisors help investors to save more overall, or are they just encouraging investors to shift between different savings forms? Which would still be good because there's a very clear tax advantage here. But of course, it would be even better if they really induce people to save more. And here we do something very descriptively. So, what you see here is this is for the retirement accounts, this is for equity investments. What is the source of the money they put into these specific forms? So, conditional on doing something, they put 3,000 on average 3,000 francs into this account. And how do the other account balances change in that month? And what we see is checking account goes down a little bit, so they just use some money from their checking account. The other accounts even go up a little bit in the same month. So the main difference here is external sources, so typically income that is coming into their accounts in this month. Okay, so they really save more in that at that moment. However, this picture, if we look at investments made in these accounts, if there's no advisory contact, looks very similar. Okay, so even if they do it independently, they also actually save more if they do it for retirement. But at least advisors don't have a negative impact here in the sense of only inducing to shift as compared to people doing that independently. Okay, final point, conflicts of interest. So the bank doesn't earn anything with this. So why are advisors doing this? They're just friendly people. Most of them probably are, but still, why are they spending a lot of time on this? And to analyze this, whether there's also something in this in terms of profitability for the bank, what we do is a very simple analysis at that stage. So this is still very preliminary. We relate the profitability of the client, which we have from the internal managerial accounting of the bank, per quarter to the fact whether that person has a retirement account or equity investments. And what we see is that if that person has a retirement account in a given month, the bank earns significantly more with that client as compared to if that client wouldn't have this account. And this is again having all of these control variables and fixed effects. So how can that be, given that I said the bank doesn't charge anything on these accounts and they don't earn anything on these accounts? Well, this is, we would argue, probably due to some cross-selling they're able to do that. So if the client feels, okay, I was advised very well, they helped me to set up this account, I save a lot of taxes now, so probably they trust him more or her more, and therefore also do other stuff which is profitable for the bank. Okay? And we find the same for equity investments. Here it's maybe not so surprising because the bank directly earns commissions and stuff as sales provisions potentially if there are equity investments. Okay? But we certainly have to dig deeper here where this is coming from. But it's not coming from fees on the retirement accounts themselves. Yes?
Does the Swiss government in any way subsidize or pay or tax credits to the banks to encourage them to get people to save for retirement?
Not that I'm aware of. They have to offer this product, but I don't think there's any subsidy or anything. But I would have to check, but I'm pretty sure there's not.
How would you interpret the numbers here? Is it like 5 francs per day, or?
No, this is 5 francs per client per quarter in additional profits if that person also has a retirement account, or 24 francs. Okay.
So just on that last one, it would be nice to know the correlation between having a retirement account and equity, because I mean, that's a number you should be able to calculate, but it's probably pretty high.
I could imagine so, yeah.
Yeah, which is to say that, yeah. So.
Okay, good. So, conflicts of interest, yes, but maybe there's, well, let me conclude. So, I think this is the first paper on financial advice and personal retirement savings, looking at actual decisions that people make with field data. Advice clients are more likely to take advantage of these tax-exempt retirement accounts and to start investing in equity, invest more in equity. Financial advice does not primarily target those most in need, and advise clients use external sources and checking accounts to fund their investments in their retirement savings. Savings, or saving and saving more for retirement, is associated with an increase in bank profits, pointing towards, I want to be careful here, would like to rephrase that, a potential win-win situation. At the end of the day, it's very tricky to really say, do clients really benefit? I think it's very clear that they benefit from doing this retirement saving. This whole cross-selling that goes on in the next stage, are there things they could have bought instead which are less profitable for the bank and better for them? Maybe, but is this really the counterfactual? And is an expensive bank-owned mutual fund still better than no equity investment? So that's very tricky. That statement, to make a welfare statement at that point is very tricky, and I think impossible for us to make. So win-win is, take that with a grain of salt. Okay, so that's what I have. So looking forward to it.
So thank you very much for this really nice presentation, Stefan. And actually, Philipp, if it was you, thank you very much for putting me as a discussant on this paper, because it was very fitting. Like, I'm German, I used to live in Switzerland before I moved here. I work on retirement-related topics, so it's very fitting.
And financial advice.
And financial advice, of course. So yeah, I'm discussing the financial advice and retirement savings, that Stefan just presented. And so first of all, I just do a very quick summary. I'm standing between us and the break, so I won't take my 15 minutes. So the authors analyzed the effect of financial advice on retirement savings. I think that is quite clear now. They use proprietary data from a bank in Switzerland that links the interactions or the bank advisor client contacts to the client's subsequent investments into retirement savings accounts, and also in the stock market, to their stock market participation. So maybe just to mention briefly, I think it's a really cool data set, and as far as I've seen, there's been 2 papers already published very well with that data set. So congratulations on that. It's a very relevant topic. We've heard a lot about how relevant retirement savings are, how people are nowadays more and more need to make their own decisions in that respect. The whole paper is a very comprehensive analysis. So we've seen now pretty much, I think, all the steps, how the authors are going through different attempts to tackle selection. And just to maybe sum up a little bit their findings, even though we had them just in the last slide. So the clients are more likely to invest into the tax-exempt accounts, retirement savings accounts, and also to equity on the extensive and the intensive margin after being approached by an advisor. Advice does not target the vulnerable clients, so female clients, poorer clients, clients with less financial education or less education in total overall. Women are more likely to act upon the advice, and the poorer individuals are less likely to follow that advice. Then, so with respect to the funding of these contributions, the clients, what they find is that clients do not reallocate the savings, so they don't liquidate other assets, etc. But what they do is they increase their overall retirement savings using external sources, which was here labeled as income, etc., and money from checking accounts. And an increase in client retirement savings actually significantly increases the bank profits, which now Stefan kind of went a little bit cautious there, could lead to a potential win-win situation. So what I really liked about the paper as well is that it is, as you already also mentioned, a positive paper on financial advice. So we have a lot of papers that talk about potential biases or, advice that is not in the best interest of the client. But this is one paper that kind of sheds a positive light on this section. So I said already that the authors already took a lot of steps towards ensuring that there is no selection, or at least selection as possible, or accounting for the selection effect. For instance, they only focus on the contacts that were initiated by the advisor, but even there, I would still want to discuss a few issues that could come up when we want to think about potential selection effects. So for instance, what exactly is a client-advisor contact? Is it, so you said you're basically looking at when they're meeting up, but if that's the case, if a client-advisor contact is actually the meeting already where advice is given as a consequence of the advisor contacting the client, that means that there's probably been multiple approaches of the advisor to contact the clients where they just said, no, thank you, I don't have any interest. So there is already a selection effect, even if we look at advisor-initiated contacts. So that is something I was kind of missing a little bit in the discussion on selection effects, that if that is what the definition of client-advisor contacts is, if it's not the advisors calling them up and there's a potential for the client to say no, but it's already them meeting, then we have a selection effect here per se. So one thing which would, I don't know whether you have that data, probably not, whether how often the clients were actually called up to see how often they refused, because if that was possible, then you could maybe also see whether, or you can anticipate that there's a selection effect in the sense that the clients are actually taking up the offer to be advised when they're already planning to put money into their account. So this is, you could control up, for instance, for the numbers of times that they had been approached and said no, but again, I don't know whether you have that data. So what I also, in that context of being contacted multiple times, what I was wondering, obviously there is such thing as multiple contacts, because you're using, for instance, does this have a pointer? I don't know. So you're using, you're saying that the clients are on average contacted every 8 years in retirement-related topics or on retirement-related topics. And in your instrumental variable regression, you also make use of these multiple contacts by looking at the clients that were contacted in the same month as the clients of interest in the past, I think, 3 years, which means that I don't know whether that's also retirement-related contacts or any kind of contact, because then that means that there are many clients actually that have been contacted multiple times, at least within 3 years. So that's a shorter period here as well. So I think it would be really nice to see the distribution of the number of contacts across the clients by key characteristics, to see or understand a little bit more which clients are more often approached, and then probably also didn't say yes all the time. Okay, so I had another potential issue. If it's not the actual conversation but the attempt to contact, then I would like to know what the take-up rate is. But I think from your nodding, I understand that it's the actual meeting, right? So then this is reductive. Okay. So then, again, it's still in the context of selection. I saw that for the funds, basically, for the retirement funds, you had analysis on a daily basis where you could look at whether actually the advisor was maybe incentivized to contact the client because they saw that there's already been some contribution into the retirement account, or they were already investing into retirement funds. As I understand, you probably cannot do that for the retirement account, that analysis. We do still have the problem here that there is a pre-trend, so that we see the clients are actually already more likely to invest into the retirement accounts before they're contacted. So it's not just the delta on the bank account balance, but also on the retirement account balance that plays a role here in the pre-trend. And it seems there's nothing you can do about it. I was just lacking a little bit of information, because with the other graphs you were highlighting in the paper, there is no pre-trend. But there's one graph, there is a pre-trend, and there's no talking about it. So I just maybe be transparent and say, so we have this trend here, but we can only look at the retirement funds when we go into the daily analysis to argue against this. Okay. So the second comment is on optimality. So I did not put this on the slides after Glenn's discussion of or comment on our paper this morning, but it seems to me that there's an implicit assumption that the advice given is always optimal to the client. So you've mentioned it several times, because they're tax exempt, it seems that everybody should do this. I'll come to that in the next slide as well. But first of all, we would need to have an idea of what is actually the content of the advice. So you said we have the topics, but we don't really know what the advisor is actually telling the person to do, right? Because, so you say, for instance, hence conditional on receiving advice, disadvantaged clients are not more likely to follow this advice. But what does follow the advice mean if we don't know what the advisor actually tells the client? So assuming, or that I think that's the implicit assumption here, that all advisors always recommend to open an account, increase the savings, the retirement savings in this account, and invest into equity and also individual stocks, if I'm not mistaken, if I read that correctly. So that I think is the implicit assumption. But then we have to think about whether this is actually always optimal, and that could depend on many things. So for instance, the performance of the fund or the individual stock, the risk preferences of the client's overall portfolio that they already have potentially with other banks. I know in Switzerland it's common to have one house bank, but I'll have one more comment on that as well. Then the client's level of liquidity. So for instance, you say the documented effects are somewhat smaller, suggesting that poorer clients are less responsive to retirement-related financial advice. Maybe they just need that liquidity. Maybe it's not optimal for them to invest because they need the liquidity. Then one thing which you might not be able to answer it as well, I don't know, but I'm not sure about whether actually everyone living in Switzerland, so everyone in your sample, all the clients at the bank, is eligible to receive these tax benefits. So this is a private experience. When I was living in Switzerland, I was on a B permit, so I was a temporary resident, and I know that my tax treatment was very different to the one for the permanent residents and the citizens. So I'm just maybe one piece of information on these accounts that would explain whether actually everybody in the sample could benefit from the tax exemption. And then to my next point, it can also depend on where the money comes from. So whether it's cash or other investments that could be potentially before been at other banks, that could have been superior, could have been liquidated, that were moved into these accounts. Because what you do find is that mostly these contributions to the accounts, to the retirement savings accounts, are funded by withdrawals from checking accounts, but also from external sources. These external sources here you label as income. I think sometimes there was also an example about inheritance or any discretionary additional income. And what I was thinking is, in order to make that statement a little bit stronger, like you compare it for when people invest into the retirement account after being approached by an advisor or not being approached by an advisor, but I think you should compare it also to all the other years when they did not make a contribution to the retirement savings account. Because usually income is relatively stable, at least over a few months, right? So you can see whether this delta here in bank wealth is relatively similar in those months and the months where they actually didn't contribute. Because if that's the case, if it's relatively similar, if it's the same, then it's likely income. If it's relatively similar, maybe a bit of consumption. Maybe they just didn't consume as much and left some income in there. However, if the delta bank wealth in this month here is larger or substantially larger than in the other months, then they likely got some liquidity from somewhere else and put it into their account in order to put it into a retirement savings account. So that would mean potentially they had something at other banks, they had other investments, anything where they could withdraw some liquidity, and that might not be optimal because we don't know what these investments were and how they were standing with respect to what they're investing in right now. So this is a simple analysis you could do just to maybe support your statement or your idea that this is just income and it's actually not a redistribution of assets or of savings, different savings, but it's increasing savings. Then one quick comment, so you also said, for instance, that you had not yet compared the clients that solicited or that initiated the interaction with the advisors. If you do that, so there's, for instance, the paper here by Hong and Yong, where they actually compare the effect of solicited advice and unsolicited advice, so you could also relate it a little bit to the literature. And then another paper which you might want to have a look at is when you say, for instance, poorer clients are somewhat less likely to respond to advice. So whether these people that actually need advice most are more or less likely to respond to it. You can relate it to a paper by Andreas Hacketal and co-authors, where they find that investors who are in most need of financial advice are actually least likely to obtain it, and even if they do, they hardly ever follow the advice. I have one very minor comment before I'm done. That's just so the paper does not have any formal representation or illustration of the empirical analysis. So there's 0 formulas, which was very surprising to me, and I don't yet know whether I think that's good or bad because it was really easy and nice to read, and it was actually very impressive that you managed to describe all of that in words, and I still got it without spending too much time. But then yet you still sometimes have to reread the paragraphs because when you have a formula, you just see the variables immediately. And then if you want to think, well, but did they control for this? Was this lagged in that way? You just reread the paragraph all the time because with formula you just see it. And so just one thing that I thought was kind of curious, but again, it might be a taste thing. So that's it. Here's the literature. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you so much for putting so much work into this, and the comments are all very well taken. Lots of food for thought. So the last one with the equation I found interesting. I tend to prefer to not show simple linear regressions anymore as formulas, but I think your feedback shows that you should do that. It's probably easier to directly see the model. With respect to the selection, who is willing to talk to the advisor after being contacted, that's a good point. We only see, we see every phone call when they answer the phone, but we don't know whether they really start to discuss. So we don't see attempts when they see the advisor's number on their phone but don't answer the phone. So this is something a little bit tricky. I have to think about whether our instrument wouldn't address that actually, whether in the instrumental setting that would be a problem or whether this addresses. I have the feeling it helps us a little bit at least. Content of advice, unfortunately, I don't know. In one of our other papers, we have protocols on investment advice, and there we see if they do something after talking to advisor. In 99%, it's what the advisor told them to do. But this was another setting, so yeah. And all the other comments, very well taken. Thank you very much. Very helpful suggestions.
Quick question. This is something that also came up in the first paper, and I understand this is Retirement and Savings Institute, but there seems to be a presumption, and this is the point about the optimality slides, which I thought were perfect because they were rhetorical. Question. How do we know people should increase their savings? We have such pitiful, descriptive, structural analyses of why. Is it their beliefs? Is it their probability weighting? Is it their hyperbolic discounting? Is it just making mistakes and none of the above? What's driving it? All we keep saying, push it. Let me give you an example. In insurance, I'm spending years and years and years in terms of people pushing to say we should get people in developing countries to buy more insurance. Anything that gets them, it's like selling toilet paper. Whatever trick gets them to buy more insurance, that's good. And it ain't good because they're selling poor quality products. Surely we should spend a lot more time on figuring out why people aren't. I'm not saying this is a bad thing to do, and I'm not pretending that we can come up with everything is done optimally, quite the reverse. But the lack of structural knowledge as to why people are doing these, and then we say win-win, I get terrified. I truly get terrified if I was giving policy advice, because it's like leeching people. We don't know anything about the mechanisms that are causing it. That strikes me as stunning.
Well, with respect to the win-win, I was taking a step back from that, as I think
and you quoted Schroeder that said, people said once they got old, gee, they wish they had more. That ain't the kind of evidence, it's not nothing. But that's not what we care about. We need to know why ex ante they make that decision before we start doing serious normative work.
Well, admittedly, we take this as a starting point that the majority of people seem to believe there's a problem with undersaving for retirement. I think questioning that is beyond that paper for sure. It might still be a valid question, but a much bigger question. But this is admittedly our starting point. That is, okay, there is a problem. But yeah.
I'm fine with saying conditional on this being proven to be a good thing, and it hasn't been. that's all, that's it.
Yeah.
But we don't put that little bit in, do we? We
Yeah.
just assume that we should
Yeah.
increase savings, retirement savings in this.
But I think conditional on this, the other points on is this optimal, this is what I said. I mean, it's very tricky to say, should they have invested in ETF instead of what they get in this cross-selling procedure? I think the tax advantage is pretty clear, except of extremely liquidity constrained people, okay? But we do some analysis now where you say, okay, these are people that have sufficient liquidity in their accounts, that are employed, that have a lot of money. There's no, at least no observable reason why there should be a problem of doing that, but yeah, still.
But it seems, do you really need that normative motivation for the paper?
Well, if I think if you want to make a statement, there's a bright side of financial advice, then probably yes. If you just want to show they follow
Because the problem
advice,
is, like, from knowing really well that it's really not clear that people are undersaving. There's very good papers in the JP and elsewhere that make a very, very solid points that maybe people are actually oversaving. It really depends on the model you use. And so starting with that, I think, is going to put off a lot of people. If you start with that as a motivation, like,
Yeah.
I find your paper interesting even without that motivation.
I thought the descriptive stuff was fabulous. I mean,
Yeah.
really, I mean,
And the oversaving may actually be even more pronounced. At least I know that for Germany, it's true that people are actually really off that we think that they may be oversaving, or maybe true in Switzerland also, saving rates are much higher there than here.
yeah, I guess then you have to change the framing, and then you can show that they react to this advice. And conditional on saving more, that's a good way of saving because you have the tax benefit, at least in this setting. That's getting more tricky with respect to the equity market participation. If we say this is not a puzzle, these people shouldn't invest in equities, then of course we can't say this is a good thing to start with.
But just documenting that advice has an effect, like increases participation in this thing. You don't need to start everything in that paper. It seems like other people then come in and say, was this a good thing, a bad thing? And also depending on the variation by income and that effect, like you can in various countries, I don't know about Switzerland, but in our case, like low income folks, if you show that they save more, probably with pretty much any model, you could say that that's probably over saving because they already have 100% replacement rate in retirement.
yeah.
So you're playing off those sort of contrasts and seeing whether might be a little bit more fine-tuned if you really want to get to the normative. But it seems to me, it wasn't clear to me that the paper was not interesting if you didn't have the normative motivation.
Okay.
But
You also have relatively rich people, so for people for 70K, I guess, right, in their wealth, probably stock market participation is optimal. Probably they should invest in equities. So that's another.
Yeah, well, for Switzerland, they are normal people. For the rest of the world, they are relatively rich people.
Even the Germans in Switzerland, right?
I'm just thinking about
But
the
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Awesome. So we have a break until 3:30.
Good.